So, one of the things that I love about living in this community is our opportunity for outreach that comes in a lot of different forms. And one of the ones that I've felt a really strong heart connection to from the get go is the interfaith dialogues that we participate in. And, part of that is kind of the history of this community is that, His Holiness, probably soon after he, became a refugee in India, he started having dialogues with the incredible diversity of religious faiths in India. And then, Venerable, that was probably about 40, 50 years of his ordained life. And then Venerable, being his student, the apple of interfaith dialogue does not fall far from the tree. And so she's been doing it for at least 30 years. And so I think just by extension, because she brought that value into the community, that we have that as one of our values, besides the outreach for the incarcerated and climate, getting involved in social activism at the level that we can. So anytime there's an opportunity to do an interfaith event, I could just feel my heart just get really excited. And one of the things that I've had to kind of come a little bit to terms with is that when you do interfaith in these large urban settings, it's going to be a multitude, a diversity of spiritual traditions. You're going to have Judaism, you're going to have Catholicism, you're going to have Baha'i, you're going to have Muslim, you're going to have all kinds of Christian faiths and probably some ones that we've never even heard of. When you come to the smaller rural areas like us, interfaith means you've got a Methodist in the group, you've got a Baptist in the group, and you've got someone from the Church of Latter-day Saints in the group. And so when you put a Buddhist into that combination, it does really kind of throw the thing open a little bit more. So our presence I think is really felt, and I've seen, there's a number of members in the community that really do participate in this. So when this invitation from the Interfaith Coeur d'Alene came through, and Venerable Chuni was not able to attend, Venerable asked me to go, and I, of course, jumped at the opportunity. And part of it is that, Coeur d'Alene, that part of North Idaho, over the past 30 years, has seen its share of a rather hostile environment for diversity. The whole Aryan Nation thing back in the 80s and 90s. And it's had a share of its Christian white nationalist presence in the city. Either they come to these small pride events and they try to stir up trouble, or they're going into some of the educational systems and trying to influence the curriculum so that it's less diverse for the students to learn some diverse views on religion, culture, human rights. And so this little group called Interfaith Coeur d'Alene is really trying to be the counter measure on some of this more conservative fundamentalism that really narrows the view of what people can do and say and believe. And so, and even, the week before I did went to the forum, His Holiness at Ladakh, one of the first things he talked about when he opened up his teaching was he talked about interfaith. And then he said, when it comes to interfaith, each person must find their own spiritual path that is most conducive to them and that they feel a heart connection to, and not one size does not fit all. And so part of what I wanted to bring to that was, my thinking about how happiness is is one of the primary motivations for living and avoiding suffering. And when you find a spiritual tradition, to be able you find these deeper ways in which to find happiness, and you find very powerful tools how to avoid suffering. But to be very, very careful that we don't start imposing and having expectations around other people that they need to think and feel and believe the way that we do. Because one of the things that I know when I first met the Dharma, I was so on fire about it that I got a little bit evangelical about it. I was talking to all my friends in Seattle. You should see, I just went to this Dharma site, I just met this great teacher, all about the Four Noble Truths. And these people are kind of looking at me like, what's happened to you? It was like I was so passionate, but not in a very skillful way. I was trying to impose this enthusiasm on other people. And so one of the things that it looks like that's, so we have to be careful of that. And what I see that's happening in our country right now is folks who have a deep belief in what their faith is, getting into doing a little bit of imposing and expectation around that people should be following, their way. And so this little group is trying to keep the door open as far as, making the diversity of all faith traditions are welcome, and that we really encourage it. So there were three of us that spoke. There was Reverend Amanda Nicole, who's a young Methodist minister at one of the oldest Methodist churches in Coeur d'Alene. Then there was Matt Latimer, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which short form is the Mormons. I think they go now more by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They use the longer version of that out of respect. And then myself. So I wanted to share with you today some of the things that Matt and Reverend Amanda shared. I was just so inspired by their openness and their willingness, and they came from very, very different points of view. I just really loved it. Because I have noticed in the past few years that I have become a little biased against Christianity because of the loud voice coming from some of the Christian faith extreme people that espouse the very opposite of what I remember Jesus had said, and that a loving God might teach the faithful, and that I was concerned that the local Christian community might be losing Jesus's voice. So I wanted to go to make sure that, this was still, the voice was still being heard, the voice of loving kindness and generosity and ethical conduct. And, even though I was raised a Catholic, and despite leaving that faith, there were a lot of things I appreciated about the words of Jesus. And I was getting a little bit concerned about this beautiful Christian faith, whatever form it takes, was getting totally misrepresented, that Jesus' words were getting totally misrepresented. So Matt he's a lawyer, he teaches law at the University of Washington, so his take was kind of coming in from more of a legal aspect. He is a member of the congregation of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, and he really talked a lot about the protection of the First Amendment, that even if you're not religious, is to promote strong protections of people to be able to believe and practice what they wish. And that he said that our founders of the original Constitution had put the First Amendment into it to help avoid the, quote, Puritan mistake, which is really a common human inclination to use power to exclude those who don't believe like we do. So the whole purpose of that First Amendment was to untie the government's power from religion, so that the power wasn't used to promote one religious view over another or to oppress people who believed differently. So it was really a protectionist kind of amendment to make sure that everybody had religious freedom, and that it would provide a safe place to live out our deeply held religious beliefs and to reduce public strife. Now, and that I see is becoming more of a big issue, is that a lot of more fundamentalist Christian thinking is that they really do want to bring religion into the government. They want to bring it into the way in which the laws are held. And so that's where this tension is really starting to happen, that they do want Christ to be the driving force behind our government, our laws. And that's just so counterproductive to the First Amendment. And that he said that the Latter-day Saints are strong advocates of religious freedom, that it's impossible to coerce someone into true faith, and that one's relationship to God must be voluntary in order to be effective. Now, this seems to be a change of heart of the Church of Latter-day Saints. He said once upon a time it was quite strict. They actually found a compromise approach by a doctrine within their church called Fairness for All, that has taken into consideration some legislation such as the Respect for Marriage Act that recognizes gay and lesbian interracial marriages, even though the core belief of their doctrines is a man and a woman. That's the relationship. That they're willing to compromise and give others the freedom to choose who to marry, even though they personally, as a faith tradition, don't have that in their theology as such. And he said there's a lot of people in the church that don't particularly like the fact that they've gone to this compromise, but he said that it's an important movement toward more progressive thinking. And at the same time, this Fair Marriage Act also protects religious organizations somehow within the context of what they permit and what they don't permit within their congregations. So it gives permission on the federal level, but as far as organizations, they've got some agency. So he found that was a compromise that could be that mattered to the church. And so he said that we can work to reduce strife and protect religious beliefs by doing some very simple things. Live your faith, be an example of your faith principles, seek to understand others, especially the ones that you disagree with, to serve the community, and to protect those who are most vulnerable. Because he says if one person or group lacks religious freedom, then nobody has religious freedom. because it's sometime or another, something you believe will be unpopular. And apparently when the whole Latter-day Saint movement began with Joseph Smith's experience of God, they were so poorly discriminated against and treated so harshly in Missouri that they actually migrated to Utah because they couldn't practice the way that they had wanted. So he said that the Latter-day Saints have got some tenderness around this whole thing about religious freedom. And then the second sharing was Reverend Amanda Nicole. I just loved her talk. It was just so on board to some of the values that I personally share. And I just wanted to give you some of the samples of her talk. So one of the big key points was that she said, my practice of presence must begin in humility, because humility is the soil in which mutual relationships can grow. And the only way we can peacefully navigate our differences as human beings is through mutual respect and relationship. So she talked about in some of these, in the Hebrew Bible, they consider humility as a form of wisdom. And that she said that the great traditions kind of hold this as a common value because most traditions understand that humility is a prerequisite for curiosity. And that you can't be curious if you do not have first the humility to acknowledge that you don't know everything. And that she has found it to be a very powerful antidote to fear. That we fear what we don't understand, and when we don't understand and get afraid, we start to hate the things that we fear. But our curiosity, she says, is a very, very powerful antidote when applied in the early stages of that. She also said that curiosity encourages us to keep asking questions in the interest of understanding, not so much to prove other people wrong, but so we can understand each other better. So she's coming into that middle ground. And that she said sometimes in seeking the understanding by looking at other faiths, she says it actually challenges and complicates your own understanding of your own faith. But where there is complication, she said, there's often an invitation to renew and to deconstruct and reconstruct habits of being and thinking for the purpose of cultivating a healthier spiritual life. So she shared segments of her ministry where she thought she got really stale in her theology. She got really stale in her faith. So she went to a mosque and she had the experience of being with them, watching the men do their thing because there's separate genders when you go to a mosque. And then she was able to go and be with the women. And she was so inspired during this time of sort of dryness in her own practice. She said it got so moistened by the fact that she saw people so deeply impassioned in their devotion to God. She said it was really like going to an oasis in the middle of the desert after she had had that experience in the mosque. And so she saw that as one of the ways in which you can nourish your own practice by watching the devotion and the love of people of other faiths. And that she believes that the potential that other religious traditions can foster in our personal spiritual lives is one reason why we really need to cultivate tolerance and love and acceptance of religious freedom. She did say, and this is where I kind of agreed even more so with her, she said pluralism can be healthy, which is this whole inclusivity of regardless of what your faith tradition is, and that she doesn't advocate, she called it syncretism, which is this thought that some of the Christian faiths say we're all going to the same place, we're all going to the same end, we all have the final goal. And His Holiness, when he meets up with those, he gently says, no, we don't. We actually have a different goal, we have a different way, we're going a different direction. So she said, I'm not into syncretizing everybody to go along the way. She said, but I do believe that working for this dialogue is a courageous stance to take, particularly in a world where we are entrenching deeper and deeper into our echo chambers. And that she said to accept each other, we have to have the courage to tolerate the discomfort of our differences. That we must courageously share our convictions with others who believe differently than us, and to have the courage to relinquish the control over their convictions. She said the imposition of our own conviction onto other people's faith, she says it's just going to be the major undoing of peace and harmony in our world, and that we have to do everything we can to avoid that. It takes courage to humble ourselves before the mystery of the paths others take in this life, and maybe even imagine that those paths are just as valid as our own. So to have this young Methodist minister stepping up to the plate, really bringing it down to the bare essence of what we really do believe in the Dharma as well, despite the fact that we believe that this is really, as His Holiness said, this is my path, is to really believe because the human mind is so spectacularly unique that we can't all go the same way. It wouldn't work. And so to be in the presence of people that have the same values and are trying to keep that door open in the middle of all of this tightening down and this, imposing and badgering people, it was really quite lovely to be in the company of the folks who are really trying to take a courageous stand. So any future events that happen regarding that particular organization, I would really encourage any of us to participate. They're really lovely people. So anyway, just something to share. Really was a very moving evening.